A really important part of painting your miniatures, and something that's actually often overlooked, is basing them, because this is really the finishing touch of doing your miniatures. And so it's really important because it can lend it a neat and tidy finish, but if you choose the colours correctly, it can really set off the main scheme of your army and lend it a narrative as well. Now, there's a million ways of doing bases on your miniatures, and this can be overwhelming. So in this video, what we're going to do is take a look at 3 great techniques that are personal favourites of mine that I use all the time. They're really quick, really easy, and look great. So without further ado, let's get started. The first method that we're going to take a look at is what I call Grasslands, but this is essentially a very generic way of basing your miniatures that works well for just about anything, and by changing a few key features later on, you can actually get some radically different results. So it's actually a really flexible way of basing your miniatures too. Now for this example here, and indeed all the examples in this video, I'm going to be doing this on a 40mm round base from Citadel. Now obviously there's no miniature on here, and that's just because I don't want it to get in the way of what I'm illustrating, but the base is undercoated because typically you do this at the end of painting your miniature, so the base will be undercoated too. I've used standard grey from the Colour Forge, but the colour isn't important at all because you can do this over any starting point that you want to do. Now what we need to do is begin by getting some texture on there, and for this we're going to use some sand, so we need to glue it on there using some PVA glue. So the first thing to do is just get some PVA glue, get it onto your palette, so just a little dollop there like that will be absolutely fine, and then get an older brush to apply it. The one I'm using here is a regiment brush from the Army Painter, and all you need to do is just scoop up some of the glue and then just start painting it onto the surface of the base just all around here. With the base covered, the next thing to do is to dip it into some sand. So I've got a little tray just here. This is builder's sand that we got from a garden centre, and we did sieve it to get rid of all the big rocks and things, but it has a bit of variety now, a bit of a different texture in there, so it adds a bit more interest to the surface of the base. What you do is just dip it in there, make sure it's nicely covered, and then remove it from the tub and just tap away the excess there like that. Now the next thing is really important, and that is just to run your finger or thumb around the outer edge to just dislodge any bits that are stuck on the side, just to make sure that we get a neat and tidy appearance. Once you've done so, it's just a matter of waiting for the glue to dry, so I recommend leaving it for about an hour. Once that glue is completely dry, the next thing we need to do is soak some colour into the sand, and here what you want is a fairly neutral brown. Now the one I like to use for this is Dust Bowl, which you can see just here on the palette. You can see it's a nice sort of medium brown. It very much looks like dried soil in colour, but anything like this is going to be absolutely fine. And what we need to do is thin it really heavily with water, and so to do this it's a good idea to get a large brush. I'm using a monster brush from the Army Painter, and you want to get lots of water and just pull some of that paint into it there like that, so you get a very thin, very inky version of the paint. Now with that mixed up there like that, it's just a matter of painting it onto the sand and letting it soak into it. So just like this, just let it soak right in and really stain it with that colour. And once you've done so, give it about half an hour to dry. Here we have the base now with that paint completely dry, and definitely make sure it is totally dry before you start the next step, because now what we're going to do is dry brush over the top of it to bring out the texture. And here what you want is a light bone colour. I'm going to use some Vampire Fang, and to apply it you can go for a normal dry brush if you want to, but instead I actually like to go for an older, more medium-sized brush. So I'm actually using that old regiment brush here from the Army Painter once again. The reason is because this allows a little bit more control when you're going around more intricate details around a miniature's feet, but of course the choice is yours entirely. If you are going to go for a brush like this, however, just make sure it's completely dry before you start to do this. Get some paint in the bristles, and then do this sort of motion going back and forth on tissue paper like this to work it into the brush and remove excess paint as well. And you want to be getting this sort of result here on the paper before you apply it to the base. And it's just a matter of brushing it lightly across the top of the texture. So for example, if I start here and just brush back and forth, you can see it really starts to bring it out. With that done, you can see straight away we get the impression of some loose soil there for the surface of the base. So it's primed and ready to put some static grass on the top. But before we do so, it's really important now that we paint the rim of the base. And the reason why we have to do this before adding any grass or anything like that is because loose fibres can get caught in your paint, and if this gets onto the rim of the base, it can kind of spoil that neat and tidy appearance. So that's why we should do this now. And when it comes to this, you actually have quite a lot of choice as to what colour you go for different feels on things. You can use the same brown that you used on top of the base, and this gives quite a neutral appearance that tends to make the base sort sort of fade away and not stand out very much. But if you want more of a framing device, you can go for something a little bit more stark or a little bit darker. That's what I'm going to be doing here with the dark brown, but you could also go for a black if you wanted to. I'm going to be using some scorched earth for this, and to apply it, I like to go for base coating brushes. So nice smooth base coating brushes, really. I have here one from Citadel. This is a medium base coat brush. And what you need to do is apply this as if you're doing any sort of base coat. We're just making sure you thin the paint down with a touch of water, and then it's a matter of just neatly applying it onto the side of the base. Now I like to approach it in this sort of angle just here and paint it on in this direction, because this way you can get a nice neat line where it finishes really tidily at the top edge of the base there and doesn't catch any of that sand. And there we are. You can see that gives a really neat and tidy appearance. And to be honest, you could simply leave the base here if you're looking for like a wasteland or something like that. But if I was going to do that, I would add at least 1 or 2 tufts just to break things up a little bit and give a bit of height. But of course, the choice is yours. But now what we need to do is add some static grass and some tufts. And we're going to be starting out with the static grass. It is important to put that on first of all. And again, you've got loads of choices for colours here. I tend to go for a sort of medium darkish green to give the appearance of grass in summer. So the soldiers are fighting in some sort of grassy field somewhere. But you could go for something, say, more like browns and things if you want more of a kind of arid appearance. The choice really is yours. Whatever you go for, what you need to do first of all is get your static grass, and I have some just here. You see the sort of shade of green I tend to go for. Now, I've had this tub for a long time, and honestly, I can't remember the actual company I bought it from. I do remember it was called Summer Grass though. But these days, you can certainly get something very close to this from Colourforge, who do one called Meadow Grass, but there's loads of different options, so just go for something that you like. Whatever you choose though, what you need to do now is go back to some PVA glue and your older brush for applying it. So I'm back to my regiment brush here for some PVA glue. All you need to do is just get a little dollop on your brush and then start applying it randomly onto the surface of the base. So this time it's not a matter of going all over, instead just pick some patches at random and just paint it on like this. Once you're happy with the glue, the next thing we need to do is get that static grass on there, and for this what I do is put the base right down next to the tub and get some tweezers and just use these to start pushing that grass onto the glue there like that. Just moving it around, making sure to give it a really generous good coating, and then what we need to do is remove the excess. So you just need to tap it off there like that, and you can use your tweezers to help tap away the excess too. And once you've done that, it's then just a matter of just checking the rim of the base once again, just like with the sand. So all you need to do is just run your finger around the outside just to remove any excess. And here's the result. You can see it all looks nice and natural, and once again you could just leave it here if you want to, but I like to add a few tufts on there just to get a bit of variety in height, just to make things a little bit more interesting. And just like with static grass, there's like a million different companies who make these things of all sorts of different colours and shapes and sizes. Ones that I particularly like though come out from Gamers Grass, and so I've got a pack just here called their Marshland set, and I'm using this thing all the time, as you can probably tell with all the missing grass that's on there. Really nice colours for the sort of thing I like to go for, and you get a nice little selection as well, but again there's loads you can pick from. Whatever you choose though, the application is going to be the same. What you need to do is get the little bits of tuft here that are on some backing paper and a set of tweezers. And what you do is use the tweezers just to peel them off the backing paper there like that. And they do have some glue on the underside, so then all you need to do is decide where to place them on the base and just put them on there and then press them down. Now it's entirely up to you exactly how many and where you apply these, but you can put them over the top of the static grass as well if you want to. And here we have the base with the tufts applied, and you can see I have put on quite a lot, but that's really just because I like them. I really think it gives a nice, wild, and natural appearance to the grass. So basically it's just a matter of having fun and then sticking to what you decide. And that is a key thing when doing this sort of basing. You have a lot of options on there, but once you've made your mind up for what you like, stick to that for your entire army just to ensure consistency. But as you've seen, this is nice and easy to do, and it's one of the reasons I use it so often. I think it looks great, doesn't require many steps, and it works on just about anything from Chaos Space Marines to Roman Legionaries. The next style of base we're going to take a look at is a desert base, and this is a really good one for dark coloured miniatures because the desert sands tend to be quite light, so this provides a really nice contrast and helps your miniatures stand out. Now on the other hand, the danger of this style of basing is that it can look a bit bland if you only do sand on there, so it's a good idea to look for opportunity to add just little details for a little bit of interest essentially. So half buried skulls, bits of rock, 1 or 2 tufts, that sort of thing. Now for this example I'm going to add some rocks in there, and to do this the best thing to get hold of is some slate. I have a little tub of it just here. Now I got this by just getting a piece of slate and wrapping it in some kitchen towel and basically just hammering it with a hammer so it just shatters it into small pieces. You don't need to do it very much, but you'll find it cracks really easily into small pieces and then put them into a tub and that'll last you forever. So I picked out some bits that I want to use, which you can see are in this little bit just here in the lid, and what we need to do is glue them onto the base. And the best thing to do here is to use some super glue. So that's what we're going to do. I've got my base just here, and all we need to do is just put a few little dollops on where these rocks are going to go. So I'm going to have a little cluster just there, and then one on its own a bit further away, roughly around about there, I think. And then you need to put the rocks on there, and for this I use some tweezers. So this can be a little bit fiddly, but it does keep your fingers away from the super glue. All you do is pick them up and then just drop them into place and nudge them around until you're happy. Now you just need to let that dry for about 5 minutes or so, and once you are happy with the rocks on there, the next thing to do is just fill in the remainder of the base with some sand and PVA glue, just like we did in the previous method. And here we have the result with the sand glued on there as well. It's nice and dry because I gave it plenty of drying time, and you can see it's now got that nice bit of variety because of the stones we've got in there. So it's time to get some colour that we need to soak into that sand, and just like before, what we need to do is really thin the paint down so it really soaks in there. So what you're looking for is a sort of sandy yellow colour. I'm going to use some Bale Oil Brown for this, but there's loads of different options out there, and whatever you choose, what you need to do is get some of this onto your palette with a large brush. So here I'm back to that monster brush here. And so all you need to do is get some of that paint, get tons of water, really heavily thin it down to get that very inky version of the colour, and then we need to start painting it straight onto the sand so it soaks in, and then be sure to give it plenty of time to dry. With that completely dry, the next thing to do is pick out the rocks. And you could paint the rocks the same colour as the sand, but I think it's nice to have that bit of variety in there. So what you should do now is choose a colour that's going to be sympathetic to all the sand surrounding them. In this case, I'm going to be using some Dragon Fang, and to apply it, I'm going for my medium base coat brush here because this is not particularly detailed work. It doesn't matter of just quickly blocking these in. So just need a small amount of this on your brush. Then all you need to do is just base coat these details here like this. Once that's done, the next thing to do is apply a wash over the rocks to give them a sense of weight, and here you need a dark brown wash, so I'm going to use some Battlewood wash. Now with that done, we can then dry brush the whole top of the base to tie it all together and bring out the texture, and here we want that light bone colour once again, so I'm going to go back to Vampire Fang, and then it's going to be time to paint the rim of the base. And here, once again, you've got lots of options, but for this example, I'm going to go for a fairly neutral colour with some Dust Bowl. But first of all, we need some wash, so I'm using Battlewood wash, nice dark brown, and to apply it, I'm just going to use a medium layer brush from Citadel. Now, I don't want this to be overwhelming, because I don't want the rocks to go too dark, so I am just going to add some water to the wash just to thin it down a little bit, so there, like that. Then all we need to do is just paint this directly over the stones, being careful not to get this colour onto the surrounding sand. With the wash dry, it's now time to apply a dry brush of a light bone colour onto the base, and here again I'm using some Vampire Fang applied with that regiment brush from the Army Painter. And remember, the reason why I'm going for this brush for this sort of thing is just because it allows a degree of accuracy when you're working around the feet of any miniatures. And then finally it's time to paint the rim of the base, and here I'm going for some Dust Bowl applied using a medium layer brush from Citadel. And once that's done, there's one more thing that we can do, and that is to add a tuft or two onto the base. Now, if you decide you want to do this, just be careful not to overdo it because you don't want to put too much life on there after all. But what you should do is go for some ones that are sort of like a dry sort of browny kind of colour. And I find that going for the dry step set works quite well from Games Grass, but again, there's tons of options out there. The one that looks really good is this sort of light brown colour, and just like before, what we need to do is get some tweezers. You just peel the tuft off the backing paper and then stick it to the base. And I find with these, they look particularly good if you put them in and around the rocks. And here we have the completed desert sands base. Now remember, the key thing about doing this kind of base is finding that right balance, because you want to make sure that there's some features on there to add a bit of interest, but at the same time you mustn't overdo it and make it look too populated. So these techniques you might want to scatter across your army, but as I mentioned, what I like to do is try and get at least one feature on every base, just a small one just to add that bit of interest. The other thing is this works particularly well with darker coloured miniatures, but you can do it with lighter coloured models if you want to. If you decide to do so and you find it clashes a little bit, then try painting the rim of the base in a darker colour. You'll be surprised how much of a difference that makes. The third basing method we're going to take a look at is how to do an urban rubble base, so essentially city fighting, so ideal for science fiction and things like World War II. And for this, just like with a desert base, what we want to do is get some little details on there to lend that sense of narrative, and this time we could do a little bit more because of the nature of this environment. So the main thing here is going to be putting some rubble on the base, and a really easy way of doing this is actually just to use some spare bits of sprue. Now you're always going to get bits of sprue left over when you build kits, and I've cut out one piece just here. You can see this little frame right here, and all you've got to do is get your clippers and start chopping up some small pieces of this. So for example, if I just cut right through there and then through there to get this little rod piece just here, with this we can then start chopping it down into smaller pieces to give the impression of bricks. So cutting through like here, for example. So what I'm going to do is just carry on making a little pile of bits like this. I've now cut out quite a few of these little pieces, which you can see just in my hand right here. Got a nice little selection ready to be stuck onto the base. And what we're going to do is glue these on with super glue, just like we did when we were doing those stones earlier on for the desert base. So same general principle. And in fact, at the same time, we can also add some bits of slate too. So what we need to do is just pick a place to start putting these details on the base. For example, just around here. And it's a matter of just putting down some super glue, then getting some of these bits and just popping them on to get that nice natural appearance of rubble being built up. So for example, one just there. We can have another one that's just a bit on its side, just there like that. We can also start adding in some bits of slate to bulk that up a bit more too. So just poking something in there like that, just using the tweezers to help maneuver it into these awkward places such as just there. And if you want to, you can even start adding details such as skulls. And I'm going to be doing that using the one from the Citadel Skulls kit, which we can have buried amongst the rubble and around just there. Again, using the tweezers just to help maneuver this into position. I finished applying all that, and you can see I've really gone to town, making sure we get some little piles in there, really building it up by having the sprue leaning on some rocks. And I also made sure just to put some patches of super glue on there and sprinkling just very small bits of slate on there. You can see just around there to get that nice sort of random rubbly appearance. So when you're happy with that, the next thing to do is to fill in the rest of the base. And here it's back to the PVA glue, followed by dipping the base into some sand and then giving it about an hour to dry. And here we have the result. Now the glue is dry, and you can see we've got lots of texture on there. It's all very random, and also we've got some bits of height too. So really interesting and ideal for what we need for urban rubble like this. And so now I can move on to painting it. Now you might be wondering at this stage, what about the skull and those bits of sprue that haven't been undercoated? And do you need to undercoat them? And honestly, you don't when it comes to basing something like this, because the paint will stick to it. It just wouldn't be as hard wearing as it would be if it was on a normal part of a miniature. But because of where these basing details are placed, they're not really going to get touched anyway, so it's just something you don't need to worry about. But what we do need to do is get some colour soaked in there, and this time I'm going to be starting out with a dark grey. So what I've got is some Dungeon Stone Grey, and to apply it I'm going to be using the monster brush once again, because this is a case of really thinning that paint down with lots of water and soaking it into the ground. So bring it right down to about that sort of point just there, and then it's a matter of just painting it on and covering the entire top of the base at this stage. Once you've finished painting everything grey, the next thing we need to do is pick out the various details on the base, and we're going to start out by applying two colours at the same time, just to vary which bits we paint with them. In this case, what you need is a reddish brown and a khaki, so I'm going to be using boar hide and sandstone. Now once that's done, if you've got a skull glued onto the base too, we need to base coat that with a dark bones, so here I'm going to be using some dragon fang. But first of all, we're going to be applying some boar hide and sandstone at the same time, and you can see I've got the two colours ready on the palette just here. I'm using a medium layer brush from Citadel to apply this, and I'm going to start out with boar hide. And basically what you do is just get some of this ready and then just start picking out some details on the base. So we're looking at things such as the bits of rubble, so these bricks and a few bits of slate as well. It's just a matter of picking some at random and just blocking them in. Bearing in mind you can also start picking out larger bits of stones that we might have in the sand, such as this one here, just to break that up a little bit. Now what you need to do is just pick one of these colours and pick out a number of details with it, and once you're happy, it's then time to switch over to the other one. So just make sure you clean your brush, and then we can grab some sandstone and start doing the same sort of thing. So once again, start with the brush and then just start picking out some details and blocking them in. And it's just a matter now of carrying on until you've picked out most of these areas and you're happy. And once that's done, if you've got a skull glued to the base, it's time to move on to a darker bone colour. So here I've got some dragon fang, and I'm just going to base coat this in as well using the medium layer brush. Once you've finished applying those colours, the next stage is to put a wash onto the base now, because what we want to do is really darken down the colours and get sort of like a grimy undertone there, and also a slight hint of green to give the impression of a bit of age as well. So what we're going to do is apply two washes at the same time. What I've got is Battlemud wash, which is a dark brown, and then also Necrosis green wash, which is an olive green. I've got both ready on the palette, you can see just here, and to apply them, I'm going back to that monster brush from the Army Painter. So what we need to do is just load it with one of them. So for example, I'm starting with the brown and just start applying it to the base. But as you're applying it, just really poke it into all the nooks and crannies and all the texture of the sand and things too. And every now and then, just switch over to the other wash. So for example, just changing now to the green, not even washing my brush, just going to apply this and let the two colours mix as they will. And once you've painted this all over, be sure to give the base plenty of time to dry. In this case, I'd leave it for about 45 minutes before you move on to the next stage. Now the wash is completely dry, and you can see how by adding that green in there amongst the brown, we just got those little hints of it on there, just to giving a nice little bit of colour in there. And so with that done, we can now do the next step, which is going to be just to concentrate on that skull, because if you've got one of those glued on there, it's a good idea to layer it now and just to clean it up and make it a bit brighter before we highlight the base. So we just need to quickly layer this using a sort of medium bone colour. I'm going to go for some Skeleton Legion here, and to apply it, I'm using that medium layer brush again. All you need to do is get a small amount of this thin down on your palette under control, just making sure the paint is nice and smooth. There we go. Then twisting away the excess so that we got a good point on the brush. And then we just need to apply this onto that skull, being careful to avoid recessed detail. Now we don't have to go to the same level as detail as what we'd normally do on a miniature, so really just looking for the parts that stand out will be absolutely fine, such as those there on the face, just lightly skimming the brush across it. And then on the top of the skull, we just want to start painting it around about here and following it all the way back there like that. Now that's done, we can start highlighting the other details on the base, and for this we can use some dry brushing because we've got so much texture in there. And this time we're going to be doing it a little bit differently to the previous two bases that we did, and that's because we're looking for a more dusty appearance here. So I am going to be using an actual dry brush this time, and I've got one from Citadel for this. Now there is a chance that it is going to catch the feet of your miniature when it's on there, but that's okay because as long as it's only small amounts, it'll lean into that dusty feel that we're looking for here from all the dust being kicked up from all that rubble. So what we need first of all is a light grey. Here I'm going to use some Carcharodon grey, and then once that's done we can move on to a light bone colour. So here I'm going to be using Vampire Fang. Now once that's done, it's then time to paint the rim of the base, and this time I'm going to go for a clean black to give a nice sort of framed appearance. So here I'm going for some Doom Death black. But first of all we need the light grey, so I'm using Carcharodon grey, and to apply it, as I mentioned, I am using a dry brush. This is a small dry brush here from Citadel, and what we need is a small amount of the paint there on the tip of the brush, get some tissue and work it into the bristles, really working along until only a small amount is appearing on the paper. I want to go right down to about that sort of strength just there, and with that reached we can start applying it onto the base. And the main goal here is to hit the grey parts, but it's absolutely fine if you do catch the other colours. Just want to lightly flick it on like this, just gradually building up that colour so that texture starts to jump out. Once that's done, we're then ready to move on to a light bone. So here I've got some Vampire Fang being applied with that small dry brush once again, and this time it's a lighter dry brush. So I've got hardly any paint left on the brush, and I'm just being very gentle, flicking it across everything, including the skull. And then finally all we need to do is paint the rim of the base. Now in this case I'm going for black with some Doom Death black, but a dark grey also looks really nice with this scheme. And there you have it, one urban rubble base. And as you've seen, doing this is really fun, and to be honest with you, we just scratched the surface of the kind of thing that you can do here, because you can add all sorts of bits and pieces on there to lean into that narrative. For example, you could get some plasticard rod and chop it into small pieces and just scatter on there as like some discarded bullet casings and things. You could use some spare off-cut bits of scenery on there for more rubble and all kinds of things like that, even barbed wire, all that sort of thing. So it's really up to you exactly how far you go with it, but the temptation is of course to go really far. If you're not careful, it can distract from the actual miniature, which is of course the start of the show. So just remember to bear that in mind when you're building this sort of thing. So there you have it, 3 great ways of basing your miniatures that I use literally all the time because they're really easy and fun and they look great as well. I hope you find them useful, and I hope it's given you some inspiration for your own miniatures too. So have fun, and we'll see you again very soon.